The brutal and unforgiving conditions of the Heian Era made it the Golden Age of Jujutsu, and out of the chaos emerged Ryomen Sukuna, the most powerful sorcerer the Jutsu world had ever seen. But what if Sukuna had an equal in the Heian Era? Today, I'll explore what would happen to the Jujutsu world if Gojo Satoru was born 1,000 years ago. But how does Gojo Satoru even end up in the Heian Era? Well, that's pretty simple, because the Gojo clan was already one of the great sorcerer clans during the Golden Age of Jujutsu. The Gojo clan traces its bloodline directly to Sugawara no Michizane, one of Japan's 3 great vengeful spirits, who lived and died even before the Heian period itself. Michizane was known for possessing immense cursed energy, and it's his genetics that led to Yuta and Gojo having some of the largest cursed energy reserves the world has ever seen. So the potential for Gojo Satoru to be born in the Heian Era was always there in the bloodline. The problem was this: the birth of a sorcerer with both the Six Eyes and the Limitless technique is extraordinarily rare. In the modern era, Gojo Satoru was the first person to be born with both abilities in approximately 400 years. So in our storyline, the impossibly rare combination manifests in the middle of Sukuna's reign 1,000 years ago instead of the 21st century. But if the Gojo clan already existed in the Heian Era, and those sorcerers could already use Limitless, why does Gojo specifically make a difference? You see, Limitless allows the user to manipulate space itself at an atomic level, creating a gap between themselves and anything approaching them, an invisible, impenetrable barrier called infinity. But the drawback of this extraordinarily powerful technique is that it's just as demanding in terms of cursed energy output. This means most Gojo clan members throughout history could never use it to its full potential, as they'd burn through their cursed energy reserves before getting to maximum output. But the Six Eyes changes everything, because it allows near-perfect tracking and control over cursed energy. This means Gojo Satoru was able to reduce the cursed energy leakage of the Limitless technique to near zero, effectively allowing him to run low-output techniques like Infinity indefinitely without ever running out. What that means in practice is that a Six Eyes user with Infinity cannot be killed by conventional means. No cursed tool or sorcerer can touch them while Infinity is active, or at least that's what we thought until the Shinjuku Showdown. In the Heian Era, the Gojo clan was just one of several powerful families jostling for dominance, alongside the Zenin, Kamo, Fujiwara, Abe, and Sugawara clans. Think about how the 3 great clans operate even in the modern era. They share political influence, they squabble over leadership of Jujutsu headquarters, and no one clan can overwhelm the others. If Gojo was born 1,000 years ago, he would immediately shift the balance of power between the sorcerer families. We know that the Zenin clan had once overpowered the Limitless using the 10 Shadows technique in a duel between the Zenin and Gojo clan heads, but the other clans would have been at an immediate disadvantage. But more importantly, the act of resisting Sukuna's rule becomes much more straightforward. In the original storyline, the 5 empty generals, the Deshi Pacification Squad, and the Sun, Moon, and Stars Squad were all defeated individually by Sukuna. These groups could never realistically form alliances with each other, as their clans were in a constant power struggle. But if an overwhelming power like Gojo Satoru emerged during the Heian Era, the Fujiwara-backed Sun, Moon, and Stars Squad, and the Abe and Sugawara-aligned Deshi Pacification Squad could rally around the Gojo clan. These fighting forces were the elite of their day, but they fought Sukuna separately, and they were destroyed separately. The Abe and Sugawara clans sent their best fighters to the Deshi Pacification Squad, which included the Angel and her Jacob's Ladder technique, but even that wasn't enough. Even the Zenin clan, despite their pride over the 10 Shadows technique, would have had to acknowledge the Six Eyes. The Kamo clan, as orthodox traditionalists, would have had to follow the strongest lineage, and the northern Fujiwara forces would be desperate after their repeated losses to Sukuna. However, I don't think Gojo would have led a united front against Sukuna, since it's just not the kind of sorcerer he is. We'd probably see something similar to the Shinjuku Showdown, where Gojo goes first and has the other forces on standby in case he fails. But before we talk about that, there's one player that needs to be addressed, and that's Kenjaku. Kenjaku was already ancient during the Heian Era, body hopping for over 1,000 years and running experiments on sorcerers long before Sukuna became a cursed object. His entire millennium-spanning plan, including the Culling Game, the Great Merger, and the reincarnation of hundreds of sorcerers through binding vows, was set in motion during this exact period. We know Kenjaku approached Sukuna in the Heian Era with a deal. He would split Sukuna's soul and cursed energy into 20 indestructible fingers, allowing the King of Curses to survive death and eventually reincarnate. In exchange, Sukuna presumably agreed not to interfere with Kenjaku's plans, a purely transactional arrangement between 2 beings who had no ideological common ground but found each other useful. But Gojo's presence changes everything. The only reason Sukuna went along with Kenjaku's plan was because he massively outclassed the sorcerers of his era, and he was so bored that only the sorcerers of the future could possibly excite him. And that brings us to what this theory really comes down to: the encounter between Gojo and Sukuna. In the modern era, Gojo versus Sukuna is considered the clash of the two strongest beings in history. But in that battle, Sukuna still only had 19 fingers. So what would happen if that clash took place in the Heian Era, when Sukuna was in his true form, running on all 20 fingers worth of cursed energy? Well, the first major difference is that there's no possession mechanic here, since Sukuna is still technically a human. This means he doesn't have Megumi's body or the 10 shadows, and he's operating purely on his own innate technique: the slashing attacks, the fire arrows, and malevolent shrine. But this raises another question. What's the motivation behind Gojo fighting against Sukuna? Given that Jujutsu society was much more chaotic 1,000 years ago, it's pretty likely that Gojo wouldn't have been as concerned about protecting the world from Sukuna. What's more likely is that Sukuna would have directly challenged Gojo to a battle, and forced a confrontation between the two. There are a few glaring problems here, as Gojo hasn't fought against Toji Fushiguro, which means he hasn't gone through the life-threatening experience that led him to figure out reverse curse technique. However, RCT was already well known in the Heian Era, so if Gojo ended up being a top-tier sorcerer, then there's no way he wouldn't know about it. The second issue is Sukuna's world-cutting slash, because without possessing Megumi, he doesn't have Maharaga to engineer a technique to bypass infinity. So once the two sorcerers face off against each other, it immediately becomes a question of who can break through the other's onslaught first. Now the interesting thing here is that Sukuna probably has more cursed energy than Gojo, as he was able to match Gojo's output with just 19 fingers in Megumi's body. So when the two sorcerers' domains clash, Sukuna immediately overwhelms Gojo by slashing the outside of the Unlimited Void's barrier. But once Gojo deploys Hollow Wicker Basket to ward off the slashes and decides to fight with just his cursed energy, the balance shifts. Gojo's technique has far more applications than Sukuna's, and Red and Blue provide incredible utility with their ability to attract and repel. Even though he has more cursed energy this time, Sukuna does not have Agito and Maharaga to act as distractions. But more importantly, without an adaptation to bypass infinity, Sukuna does far less damage to Gojo in this battle. And as the fight goes on, it's Ryomen Sukuna who finds himself growing weaker by the minute. The battle ends with a hollow purple that goes right through Sukuna and destroys everything else behind him for miles, finally putting an end to the disgraced one. But our story doesn't end here, because with Sukuna gone, Kenjaku now approaches Gojo. You see, Kenjaku's genius lies in making binding vows and long-term deals that pay off centuries later, and a Six Eyes user is both the greatest threat to his plans and potentially the greatest asset. Kenjaku would try to recruit Gojo as a player in the culling game, but Gojo does not carry the same bloodlust that Sukuna does. He would probably be perfectly content to die a natural death, especially after such an intense fight against Sukuna. However, I don't think Gojo would do anything to stop Kenjaku at this point either, which means we'll still see a version of the culling game in the modern era. Now you might think we're done here, but there's one more angle to this theory that tends to get overlooked, and it comes straight from the canon of Jujutsu Kaisen. When Gojo was born in the modern era, it was stated that his birth alone shifted the balance of the world. His existence was so overwhelming that the universe compensated by producing stronger cursed spirits, including disaster curses like Jogo, Hanami, and Mahito. These spirits were among the most powerful in history, and they all came into being as a direct result of Gojo's strength. Now, apply that to the Heian Era, which was already the most cursed energy-rich period in history. The widespread suffering, lawlessness, and negativity of the age had already created the perfect breeding ground for powerful curses. Sukuna himself was already the greatest concentration of cursed energy to ever exist. If Gojo had been born into that environment, the balance shift would have been catastrophic. Imagine more powerful cursed spirits, more disasters, and a Heian Era pushed even further into chaos. Heian Era Gojo might have actually needed Sukuna as a counterweight, because without the King of Curses drawing cursed energy toward himself, there would be a catastrophic surge of curses triggered by Gojo's birth. But what do you think? Did I miss any other potential consequences of Gojo being born in the Heian Era? As usual, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below.